Hello and welcome to another episode of the Trinisphere, where Timmy's, Johnny's, and Spike's battle over all things EDH, the battle for supremacy. I am Shannon the Johnny, and I am here with the deck tech based on Obeka Brute Chronologist. I'm calling this one Obeka Sneak and Whip. Obeka Brute Chronologist is a 4-mana 3/4 Ogre Wizard. It has one ability that says tap, the players whose turn it is may end the turn. Notice it says may, so you cannot use this to time stop your opponents, unless they want to. Now, part of my deck building process is I look at a commander and I try and decide how a Timmy and a Spike would build it, and then I try something completely different. I look at Obeka as a Sundial of the Infinite in the command zone, capable of dodging at the beginning of the end step triggers. So a Timmy might use this in conjunction with cards like Sneak Attack, abilities like Unearth and Encore to keep creatures around after cheating them into play. A Spike might use the extra turn effects like Final Fortune in conjunction with Isochron's Scepter to create an infinite loop of extra turns. Of course, Final Fortune normally says you'd lose the game at the end of turn, but Obeka can help you dodge that trigger each time. As a Johnny, I had settled on a build based on Hive Mind and all of the packed cards that caused you to lose the game. That way you can use Sundial the Infinite and Obeka to dodge this losing game trigger while attempting to cause your opponents to lose the game with the same effect. However, after talking to the guys, I thought it'd be a lot more fun to play the Timmy version of this deck, so today I'll be talking about Obeka, Whip, and Sneak. So in this Timmier list, we're going to look at using cards like Sneak Attack and Whip of Erebos to cheat creatures into play, and use Obeka to keep them around longer than they should be. We're also going to continue to use the extra turn effects Final Fortune and Last Chance, and also Glorious End. We're going to use these cards to give us extra turns, but mainly extra attack steps so that we can beat people to death with our cheated out giant creatures. Some additional cards that we're going to abuse include Blade of Selves, Flame Shadow Conjuring, Hellkite Courser, Ilharg the Razeboar. So note that Blade of Selves and the Myriad ability does cause you to sack those creatures at the end of combat. However, there is a combat cleanup step after damage is dealt that you can choose to end the turn using Obeka to keep all of your myriaded copies of creatures around. We're also going to run Kroxa, a Titan of Death's Hunger, Mimic Vat, Perforos Bronze-Blooded, and Warchief Giant. Kroxa, being a 2-mana 6/6 that is sacrificed when it enters the battlefield, can be easily abused with Obeka here. For 2 mana, we create a 6/6 that enters the battlefield. It creates 2 ETB triggers, one that causes our opponents to discard a card, and one that causes it to sacrifice itself because it was not escaped. Now we can reorder those because they're both ETB triggers to have our opponents discard a card, and then after that's happened and resolved, we can end the turn, keeping Kroxa around even though it didn't escape. Perforos the Bronze-Blooded acts like a second Sneak Attack, although the number of creatures we can use with its ability is limited because it only can Sneak Attack in red creatures and artifact creatures. However, this does also give the rest of our creatures haste, which is a great ability, and it's a 7/6. Warchief Giant has Myriad. It's a 5-mana 5/3 with haste, and that is pretty decent because it makes copies of itself, and each of its copies have Myriad also. This means you can get a multiplying wave of Warchief Giants every time they attack. You swing once, you create 2 copies. Then next turn you have 3 of them swinging, which creates 6 copies, and on until your opponents destroy all of your Warchief Giants. Now, because we've been talking a lot about how Sneak Attack is going to be used in the game, but we also are going to use Whip of Erebos similarly. The lifelink is going to be great, but also being able to use our graveyard as a resource makes it much harder to deal with this deck. Simply destroying creatures is not enough to set us out of the game. We're going to focus a portion of our draw power on filling up our graveyard. Cards like Bizarre Trade Mage, Cavalier of Flame, Champion of Wits, and Faithless Looting help fill up our graveyard in the early and mid game. Additionally, Fisher Wizard, Frantic Search, Ideas Unbound, and Is It Charm are going to be running here. I really like Ideas Unbound. This 2-blue sorcery says draw 3 cards, then discard 3 cards at the end of turn. So while this acts often like a bigger Faithless Looting, you can use Obeka to dodge the discard part of this card, so it just becomes 2 mana draw 3. To finish out our looting engines, we have Neheb Dreadhorde Champion, Owl Familiar, Rix Mahdi Reveler, and Stinkweed Imp. So you can see there's a lot of cards dedicated at filtering our early game, putting stuff into our graveyard for later reanimation, and just smoothing out our hands to the best of their ability. Now, once we filled up our graveyard, we can use Whip of Erebos, but we can also have some other reanimation engines in this deck. Apprentice Necromancer, Chainer Nightmare Adept, Doomed Necromancer, and Feldon of the Third Path. All great cards at reanimating big creatures in our graveyard. Feldon of the Third Path and Apprentice Necromancer both have, at the beginning of the next end step, effects which can be dodged by Obeka, so we can keep cheap versions of big creatures around longer than they should be. We're also going to run Goblin Dark Dwellers, Phyrexian Delver, Sidrus the Traitor King, and Swift Warkite. I like Goblin Dark Dwellers because it free casts things like Final Fortune or Last Chance or Glorious End out of our graveyard, giving us a little extra reach on our instants and sorceries. Onto our ramp, removal, and draw. For our ramp, we don't have any really creative cards in this list. We have our basic set of 3 signets, Dimir, Izzet, and Rakdos. We have our 3 talismans, Creativity, Dominance, and Indulgence. And then we have Arcane Signet and Soul Ring, a pretty standard set of mana rocks. For removal, we're going to have obviously some big creature-based removal spells. We're going to have Cavalier of Night, Chaos Warp, Dream Eater, and also Drown in the Lock. You can see Dream Eater also doubles as a graveyard filling effect with that Surveil 4. We're also going to run Emissary of Grudges, Identity Thief, Massacre Girl, and Nimble Obstructionist. Emissary of Grudges is just big beat win cons. That 6/5 flying haste is pretty sweet, and the ability to bank a redirect or a deflecting swat is also very nice. Identity Thief works really well in Obeka decks. This 4-mana 0/3 says whenever it attacks, exile target non-token creature. And if you do, Identity Thief becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. Return the exiled card to the battlefields under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So you can see it has 2 different triggers that say at the beginning of the next end step, which can be dodged by Obeka. One returns this to being a 0/3. The other gives our opponent their creature back. So if we use Obeka to end the turn with both of these in the stack, Identity Thief remains a copy of the creature it exiled, and our opponents never get that creature back, making this kind of like a 4-mana duplicate. So a deck like this can run out of cards pretty quickly, so we're looking at ways to just refill our hand, especially when looting usually nets us 0 cards advantaged. We usually are losing as many cards as we gain, so that's more as a filtering effect. These will be focused a lot more on putting extra cards back into our hand. We're going to run Angie's Ravager, Cavalier of Gales, Disciple of Bolas, and Dragon Mage. Dragon Mage is just a wheel on a body, which is super great to cheat into play to replenish our hand. And Disciple of Bolas can be used on some of our fat, big, huge creatures to gain us a lot of life and draw a lot of cards. We're also going to run Magus of the Wheel, Mold Drifter, Ox of Agonis, and Ponder. So with Mold Drifter, you can actually use Obeka to dodge the Evoke Sacrifice trigger. When you evoke Mold Drifter for 3, it puts it into play, creates an ETB trigger to draw 2 cards, and another trigger to sacrifice Mold Drifter. You can of course end the turn after drawing 2 cards, keeping your 2/2 flyer around, as if it were a living divination. And finally, to round out our draw list, we're going to use Preordain and Wheel of Fortune. If you got it, you gotta run it. Now, seeing as this is a more Timmy approach to this list, for our tutors, we're only going to run Runescarred Demon, Spellseeker, and Tribute Mage. Runescarred, very fun to cheat this into play. It's been a long time since I've ran this card, so I'm excited to see it in play again. Spellseeker helps us go find Final Fortune, along with cards like Drown in the Lock, Last Chance, or Ideas Unbound for draw power, removal, and extra turns. Tribute Mage helps us go get Blade of Selves for Myriad, and also Sundial of the Infinite if we need a backup to Obeka, having it been killed or removed, as well as a lot of our mana rocks in a pinch. Lastly, in our utility category, we have Anger, Lightning Greaves, and Sundial of the Infinite. Of course, Sundial is going to make an appearance in this deck because it is a backup Obeka, allowing a lot of our strategies to work if our commander is somehow stolen from us. Lightning Greaves gives a lot of our creatures haste, including Obeka, as does Anger when it's in our graveyard, put there by a lot of our looting effects. Okay, that's a wrap on this Obeka Whip and Sneak Timmy approach to this really interesting Sundial of the Infinite in the command zone. Let me know what you think about Obeka Brute Chronologist. I had a lot of fun going back to my Timmy roots to build this list, and I'm excited to play it in our upcoming matchup. So be sure to subscribe so you get a notification when that gameplay comes out soon. Alright, this is Shannon the Johnny, or today, I guess I was a Timmy, signing off. Great minds brew alike.